doing? It's Colin Daniel here from riffninja.com, and this is the ultimate buying guide for an electric guitar. And I've also got an acoustic version of that if you're looking for an acoustic guitar, but this one's for the electric guitar. All right, let's get started. Where am I going to start? Well, I'm assuming you're a newbie, and maybe you're not. There's some information here for even somebody that is already playing. Where do you start? Well, you have to have a budget. I guess that's one of the first things you have to do is figure out how much you can afford. You know, there's so many models of guitars out there, and there's some really good buys. And we're going to talk about some of that as we get into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the parts of the guitar as I go through it too. Let's start with the guitar I'm holding right here. May as well start with that. I got a few guitars that I brought with me today, part of my collection. Back here, a few good friends, some old friends, some newer friends, but they're all good friends. You get used to an instrument, it feels a certain way, you know, and I have my reasons. A lot of it's personal preference. One thing I recommend is don't buy a guitar by color, brand, or model. Some of the first things I recommend once you've got a price, roughly a price, is the shape of the neck. That's probably one of the biggest things. I mean, yeah, the guitar's got to be appealing to you visually, and the bottom line is you don't want to buy an ugly guitar. Well, I don't know. I like ugly guitars. I've got a few that I think are really ugly, but I love them anyways because they're so ugly. I just bought one. I wished I had it ready for this vid, but I don't. I bought it for 45 bucks. But you know what? It's a really great guitar. It's an Ibanez that looks sort of like a mutated Explorer or a mutated Iceman, if you know what that is. If you don't, look it up on the internet. Paul Stanley from Kiss used to play an Iceman, and Darren Malakin also played one. Pretty popular shaped guitar. Paul Gilbert kind of played kind of a version of the Iceman, but this thing was totally ugly but I love it, and it was actually a good playing guitar, just that I'm in the process of rebuilding it right now, so I'll save that for another time. Yeah, I am a guitar mechanic. It's not what I do for a living. I did for a while. I chose teaching over the guitar mechanics just because I felt drawn to teach and help people learn how to play. That gives me a real thrill to see people learn how to play, you know. There's a lot of teaching methods that I don't agree with, so and this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this thing about buying a guitar, because, well, there's a lot of points missed. I really feel that one of the most important things is to have a good working guitar. It doesn't have to be expensive, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be a brand name, but it has to be mechanically good. And this guitar here is a great buy for a mid-price. I'm a bit spoiled because I can pretty much have any kind of guitar I want. If I can't buy a new one, I'll buy a used one and rebuild it. So it's nice to have that skill. It takes years of experimentation to learn how to rebuild a guitar really well. There is information out on the internet. Great place to go if you're interested in building your own guitar or learning about it would be Stu Mac. That's Stu McDonald. They've got some great technicians there, some really talented people. They've got free vids on repairing guitars, and they've got all kinds of books. They've got a parts catalog. That's a place I do a lot of shopping at. No, they don't. I don't have any kind of sponsorship or artist sponsorship or anything like that. They're just a good place to go to get parts. They have lots of good. They have solid bodies, and for solid body guitars. This, by the way, is a hollow body. This is like a B.B. King or Chuck Berry style guitar. And I'm just going to flip it around for a second. You'll see on the back of it that the neck is not bolted onto the guitar like on some guitars. You'll see there'll be 4 or 5 screws in the back, and that would be a bolt-on neck. This is a pin neck. It's a glued neck. This is an interesting guitar. It's a thin line. You can see it's meaning a thinner body. I've got other hollow bodies behind me, one behind me over there. I'll show you in some point in this video. I'll show you, and it's a fat boy or fatter. There's one on top of my amp over there, the red one up there, and that's kind of in between. You can get all kinds of thicknesses of hollow bodies, and they're all made differently depending on the brand and the model. This one was built really interestingly. Most of these are built like a violin, you know, where they take the shape of the guitar, and that's the frame. Then they make a top for it and a back for it, and glue them, sandwich the top and the back, glue them onto the frame. But this guitar wasn't done this way. It was done by taking a block of wood and carving the back, because if you look again, you'll see the back has kind of got a curve to it, eh? It's not perfectly flat. It's got an arch to it. Same with the top, it's carved. But what they did was they took this block of wood and they carved it out. So they left a chunk in the center where they could mount the pickups and mount the bridge. This is the bridge here. These are the pickups. The pickups, by the way, are like microphones. They have a magnetic field that's created by winding very thin wire, as thin as your hair, around different styles of magnets. Alnico magnets, there's different types that they use in different shapes and different, some magnets are more powerful than others. Sometimes they use little pieces of magnets and they arrange them in certain ways. They all affect the way the pickup sounds, but basically a pickup is a magnetic field created by a coil and a group of magnets, a coil of wire and some magnets. These are humbuckers, meaning they're two coils. Later on you'll see, like say on the green G&L over here, they've got single coils, or in my pink Kramer, it's got two single coils in the front and a humbucker at the back, and they're uncovered. And I'll show you that in a minute, but these are covered. But underneath it is two single coils that are paired up and wired up. And the reason why they call it a humbucker is because the single coil pickup hummed a lot more. It made a lot more noise when you plugged it in, whereas when you put two coils together, one field canceled out the other and balanced them out better, so that they weren't as noisy. The background noise wasn't as much. Although the humbucker doesn't sound as high end, doesn't have the treble that a single coil has. We'll get into that some more too, but this is all part of your education, because you have to decide what pickup configuration, what you want for your guitar. And like I said, I was going through the parts of the guitar and talking about the guitar. And the reason why I'm doing that is to educate you so you can make a good decision. I've had some guitars since the 70s. Wouldn't give them up for anything. Love them. Paid big bucks for them at one time. Some I didn't pay big bucks for. Just depends on what it was and for what reason. Either way, the guitars I own, I all have a reason for owning them. And in my opinion, they all have a job to do. It's just like a good car mechanic. I always say, if you meet a professional musician or guitarist and he only has one guitar, I don't know if I have a huge amount of respect for that, because it's like meeting a professional mechanic. You got a BMW or a Jaguar, and he's got a crescent wrench and a vice grip, and he's going to work on your car. I don't think so, right? I think if you look at most of the professionals, they have at least 6, 7, 8, 10 guitars, because they all have different sounds and they all make you play in a different way. So if you're not a player and you're buying a guitar, that's a little more difficult. We'll talk about that in a second. But needless to say, these are humbuckers in this guitar, and this is what you call a semi-hollow body, because as I was telling you earlier, they took this block of wood and carved out the tone chambers, meaning the hollow part, but left the centerpiece to mount the pickups and the hardware. This is the bridge. This is a trapezoid tailpiece. It suspends with the tension of the string. I'll show you other types of tailpieces. They all create everything on the guitar affects the sound of the guitar a little bit. I can't say that one piece on here makes the guitar sound the way it is. It's all the things together. The hollow body, as say opposed to a solid body like my pink Kramer or my G&L Strat or my Gibson SG, the hollow body will sound different for sure. It has a softer tone to it, a smoother tone. But I still don't think that it's limited to playing softer music. Like Chuck Berry played one, and he played old school rock and roll or rockabilly. Ted Nugent played one, and he played 80s rock and roll with it, with this distortion. And he played a thicker body one like the one I have behind me. They did some tricks to it because of the feedback. George Thorogood, heavy blues, played a guitar very similar to that over there. Again, they did some tricks to it so you could handle the feedback, because the hollow body definitely does, when you crank the gain, when you crank the juice up on your amp and you have to play at louder volumes, will definitely feedback more. Now, because of the way this guitar is built, it actually doesn't feedback too badly. That's why sometimes they'll call this block in the center a feedback block, because it literally does eliminate some of the feedback. Because the old school hollow bodies like this, the old school thin ones, the old Gibsons and that, they were, like I told you before, they were the shape of the guitar, the frame of it, built out of wood, and then the two wood pieces glued together to create this complete hollow body. And they resonated more when you're plugged in, and they definitely had a tendency to feed back more. This guitar is great clean. Like, it has a smooth blues tone to it too. I especially like the heel pickup. This switch here takes care of the pickup selection. These knobs down here are the tone and volume. I rarely use a tone unless I'm playing a jazz stuff. All the tone does is takes the highs and rolls them off, so you get, now I've got the tone cranked up. You can hear how soft that sounds. I mean, if I'm playing, you know, if I'm playing jazzier stuff, that sound might be okay. This is a pretty versatile guitar. And it's a heck of a deal. These are about, with a really nice TKL tweed case, good quality case that fits the guitar really well. They're about $8.50, and that's in Canada, where I'm from. You probably get one cheaper if you buy one used, and I'll talk about that as we go along. I love the feel of the neck on this one. Some of them have different feeling necks, but these guitars are made mostly by CNC machine. That's a computer-controlled machine that cuts the bodies out and everything. I mean, it has to be hand-assembled and set up, but overall, all the pieces are made by a CNC machine, so they're pretty close. But for $8.50, this is, as in my opinion, and I'm sure you'll see a lot of other players out there telling you the same thing at one point or another. You'll see, they'll tell you that this is a real good buy for the price. There's some issues with it, and we'll talk about it in a minute, because it pertains to all guitars when you buy it. But anyways, yeah, this is my selector switch here, and that switches between the front and the back. The back is much more trebly. At the start of this vid, I did a riff, and I had my distortion on, and you can hear that the guitar handles the distortion pretty good. I like the front pickup. You know, it has a throatier sound. The middle sounds good with both the pickups. It sounds good clean. You know, it's a pretty good, pretty versatile guitar for rock and roll. Oh, Alvin Lee from 10 Years After still plays his old 335 hollow body, which is a thin body like this. Yeah, there's lots of guitar players. Larry Carlton, the famous studio guitar player, he uses a 335 a lot. There's a lot of great players that use hollow bodies. For sure, I have this guitar for a reason. It's a real go-to guitar. I also like the look of it too. Pretty sharp, pretty classy looking instrument with the black body and the white binding around it. This is called binding, the trim. The binding is more ornate than anything, but it also covers up imperfections in the glue joints when they glue the top onto the body. There's binding at the back. They've done a very nice job of this guitar. There are some imperfections on it. This is the neck of the guitar. This is the fretboard here. The frets are the small steel pieces of metal here that go across the fingerboard. And when you press down on a string, that's a very important part of your guitar, by the way, the frets. These frets are done very nicely. When I run my two fingers along the edge, they're not too burred, meaning they're not sharp or rough. When you buy a guitar, you can check for things like that. They're nice and smooth. It's got binding on the edges. On the Gibsons, the binding goes over the fret. On most other makes, that's a Gibson tradition. On most other makes, the frets go over the binding. These are nice. These frets are done fairly well. As I said before, these are the volume controls for my pickups. This is the body of the guitar. These are the F holes. They're like the chamber holes. I don't know if it affects the guitar that much. I've got a couple guitars. I got an old Gretsch that has no F holes, but is a hollow body. I don't know if it affects the sound very much. Probably a little bit, but not hugely. I think the hollow body part affects the sound of the guitar a lot. And the pickups, for sure, and the type of wood it's built and how big the body is, that would affect the sound quite a bit. The type of bridge will affect it. Anyways, these controls again, one set of controls for the back pickup, one set for the front. When the toggle switches all the way up to the front, then it's this is the volume here, and this is the tone back here. Like I said, I usually don't use the tone. And for the back pickup, that's my volume and my tone. It's a nice thing to have because when you're in the middle position, you can kind of alternate and bleed one pickup into the other, so you can have one pickup louder than the other, and that gives you other options to the sound. So trapezoid tailpiece, pin style bridge, meaning the bridge is pinned into the body with some posts. Humbucker pickups. This is the binding, this is the body. These are the F holes. This is the neck. This is the fretboard. These are the frets. This is the headstock. And these are the tuning machines or tuners or machine heads. These are really good machine heads on this guitar too. They're fully enclosed, they're 3-to-1. These are like a Gato Gut style. It was made specifically for this brand of guitar. I'm sure the company ordered thousands of them when they were building these guitars because they built quite a few of them. It's a pretty decent guitar. They're fully enclosed machine heads, meaning you can't see the gears. And some of the cheaper guitarists won't have that. But don't let the fully enclosed fool you, because some cheap machine heads also have fully enclosed. But these are sealed, and they're pinion gear mechanism. They're fairly good quality. The guitar has its imperfections. One thing I'd recommend for you is find yourself a good guitar technician. And we'll talk about that some more, because no matter whether you pay $5,000 or $6,000 for a guitar, or whether you pay $300 or $400 for a guitar, it still needs to be tweaked. So you have to factor that into your budget. Now I want to talk about a few more things before we move on to the next guitar. I'm not going to be able to get through all my guitars today, but I definitely want to give you a taste of what's out there. There's some really good buys out there. And as a matter of fact, there's guitars made in every country now that are really, really good. I would say Gibson, if you're buying a Gibson, you have to try them all and go through them and check the things I'm talking to you about. One thing about frets, you can pull the strings back on your frets, and you can take a look at how polished and smooth they are. If you're buying a used guitar, you can pull back strings and see how much the frets are grooved. The more grooved they are, the more playing time the guitar has had. That can be repaired, or the frets can be replaced, but it means more money, which means you'd have to get a better deal on the guitar. A fret job on average is in between $150 to $200, so you have to like the guitar a lot. But even on a guitar like this, where I've only paid $850 for the guitar, when I wear it out, because I like this guitar and I feel it's worth it, I'll refret it. It's a nice guitar. I like it. It's not the price. It's the feel of the neck. The body's great on it. Feels good. The pickups are awesome on this guitar. This is a Hagstrom built in China. If you wondered, I figured you probably could read, but if you can't read it, this is the reissue of the Hagstrom. Originally, the Hagstroms were built in Sweden, and but now they're built in China. But they're done very, very well. But they definitely need a setup. That's my only, if there's a criticism to it, and it's not, because for the price, you can't beat it. You spend another 100 to 150 bucks on the guitar, on a setup, and you take it to a mechanic, not some guy that says he's your next door neighbor that says he's a mechanic. Go get a recommendation, you know. Ask somebody that plays guitar, or go to a reputable music store. Make friends with the guys at the counter that play guitar. Maybe you know somebody that plays clubs, or somebody that's a professional musician. Ask them where they take their guitars. Myself, most of the time, I do my repairs myself. And if I don't have time to do them, because I do have a lot of guitars and I'm really busy, then I send them to my ex-student, Paul, who I trained, and he does guitars the way I like them done, because I'm very particular about them. Some of the better mechanics, like Dan Erlewine from Stu Mac, he has a list of all his customers. He puts it in a book. So when his customer comes in, he knows what type of strings they like, the type of action. Action is the height of the string. How much distance the string has from the bottom of the, underneath the string to where it touches the fret. The amount of travel before you, as you push the string before it touches the fret. That's the action. Now on all my guitars, the action is really good. On some, the action is a little lower, and some a little higher, depending on what I'm using it for. But most of them have a fairly low action if I'm fretting them. If I'm playing slide, I like to have a heavier set of strings, and the action is a little higher. When I'm finger tapping and doing, when I'm doing that kind of thing, I prefer to have a very low action. And one of the best guitars for finger tapping, or two of the best guitars I got here, actually there's three that I like for finger tapping here, my mistake. I got an Ibanez Steve I gem at the back, flower pattern, Japanese one. And that's great for finger tapping because it's got a really flat neck and wide frets, and it's got super low action. And Pinky, the Pink Kramer, is similar, and it's really a super low action guitar, and it's great for tapping too. And believe it or not, my SG, my Gibson SG there, is a great tapping guitar because it's got a fairly wide, flat neck, and that's what I like for tapping. So those are things to think about, because you know the fingerboards, some of them are more curved, like that, you know. So when you look at them and you sight down the neck like this, you see that some of the fingerboards have more of that curve. Others are more flat, right? This one has a little bit of a curve to it, not too much. Now, it's got some nice features besides the machine heads and the binding. It's got a really nice finish. They did an awesome job on the pickups. The pickups are really good sounding. I wouldn't swap them out. Sometimes when you buy a cheaper guitar, the pickups aren't as great. I found that the Epiphones, the SGs and Les Paul Epiphones, were not a bad guitar for a beginner to intermediate, even a pro, but the pickups weren't that great, and I would swap them out if I owned one of those. I'd buy a Hagstrom before I bought an Epiphone, because by the time you swap out the pickups on an Epiphone, even though they're less money, you get really good pickups in the Hagstrom. So I would personally recommend, they have a Hagstrom Super Swede, which is like a Les Paul copy, and that thing really kicks ass for a Les Paul. I don't have one here today, but I do have one in my collection. It's a great guitar. Sounds probably one of the best Les Paul copies, if you want to call it a Les Paul copy. It's a great guitar for the price. They're around the same price, $800, you know, with a nice hardshell case. This one's got a graphite nut. This is a string nut here, and it keeps your strings spaced properly and also keeps them above the fretboard, because as they go off the nut and go towards your machine head, the strings need to be sitting on something other than just the fretboard, because they need to be elevated above the fretboard. And this is an important thing that a good technician will check to make sure your string slots are at the right height, because that will also make a guitar difficult to play. It will affect your action and your intonation. And the intonation is the string length distance here, and that a mechanic has to set too. I could go into great detail over intonation, but assuming that you're more of a beginner and less experienced, I'm just going to tell you that intonation is the string length, and it's adjustable from back here from these little saddles. And the saddle is the thing that the string sits on, this little piece of metal, and it's movable and it slides forward or back depending on the thickness of your string and how it sits on the guitar. They need fine adjustment for intonation. Intonation helps your guitar stay in tune. So if you're playing at a higher spot on the guitar, or you're playing with another instrument, that the guitar stays in tune, because as you go up higher, there's a default, and you need to use this adjustment to set the default, and that's called intonation. So in a setup of a guitar, intonation is one of the things that's really important. Intonation, action, and a mechanical go over, pickup adjustment, machine head adjustment. Usually when you buy guitars from offshore, things shrink because they know the guitar is going to change. If it comes from Indonesia or China or Korea, those guitars are going to change. And the wood shrinks. So what may have been tight, like the machine heads might be tight at the factory, but they may not be anymore depending on how long it took to get from where it was. Because some of these guitars sit around for a while. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just the time it takes for them to get over here. If you're where I live on the west coast of Canada or the west coast of the US, and your stuff comes from China, then it comes over the ocean. I mean, man, it sits in a boat for a month. It sits on the dock. It sits in, before that, when they're building, the whole process from the time they get to building the bodies, because they'll do all of it in runs. Like they build a run of bodies, a run of necks, then they'll assemble the necks and the bodies. Then they'll paint them. They do a run of paint. So it may take 3 months before a guitar is built from its beginning stage of raw material to an actual playable instrument. Then it may take another 3 months to 4 months, even as much as 6 months, depending on where it's going. So all in all, you could have a guitar that's 6 months to a year old before it gets in your hands, easily, even a couple of years old. Now this guitar, I think, is an 06, yeah, 2006. Sometimes you can tell by the serial numbers. You can go online and the serial number has a date hidden in it, but it's not always the same for each instrument. I don't want to get too much into that because the age of the instrument isn't that important. If you're whether you're buying a used guitar or a new guitar, they still need to be set up. So, like I said before, things settle because they come from offshore, and it takes a little while, then they sit in the music store and people try them out. And it's nothing wrong with that, because really in the end, I'm trying to think of, I don't think I've ever bought a guitar sight unseen without like having my hand on it. I don't honestly know if I'm going to ever buy a guitar. I bought lots of parts on the internet because I know what parts I want, but I've never bought a guitar online because I'm very particular about how the guitar feels. So as a beginner, that's one of the first things you want to think about. Don't feel like a fool when you go into a music store because everybody knows how to play and you don't. I had a student, and he's very self-conscious, an older student, near 60, and he wanted to buy like a good acoustic guitar, but he doesn't feel like he plays very good. He's underconfident, okay, and he wanted to spend a couple grand on an acoustic guitar. And he was going to New York to visit his family and to do some business. And he knew this really famous guitar shop. I'm not going to mention any names, but And he was worried, well, all the pros go in there and buy. I'm just a schmuck. I don't know anything about the guitar. And these were my words of advice. I said, listen, if it's a good guitar shop that you're going into and you're honest with them and you know, you have an idea of what you want, you don't come in there being a total doorknob and a total pain in the butt, and you're polite and you don't act like you know what you're doing when you don't, they're going to help you out, because most music stores that are pro don't want you to come back unhappy. They want you to tell all your friends and the people you know that play that they were a good place to buy a guitar. So my student goes over to New York after I give him my advice. I said to him, listen, you tell whoever's at the counter that's talking to you that wants to help you, whether it's the owner or the employee, or you tell them, look, I don't know a lot about guitar. I'm just starting to learn to play the guitar. My teachers advised me to do this. I asked my teacher about buying a good acoustic guitar, and he said that I should check it out, check the feeling of the neck, check the size of the body, how it sits with my body. Do you think I've got a budget of in between $1,500 and $2,000? Do you think you could help me out? Do you think you could show me what these some guitars and what they sound like? You know what? When he came back after he approached them that way and told him he didn't know much about the guitar and didn't play a lot and wanted somebody to play the guitar for him, they did it. And he didn't buy a guitar right away, but they treated him really good, and he had a good experience, and he didn't feel like a fool. So it's not about whether you know a lot right away or not. You're going to learn something from my video. You know, you're not going to go in there totally green. If you have to watch the video a few times, you do, because there's a lot of information here. I mean, I've been teaching for over 40 years. I've been repairing guitars for almost the same amount of time, because it wasn't shortly after that that I started messing with guitars, and my first experience of tweaking guitars, because a guitar is a funny thing. It settles because it's wood and metal, and things come loose, and you learn when you start to play, especially if you've got an ear. I was very particular. I would hear a rattle in my guitar. I would go to the music store and tell them I got a rattle. A couple times at the beginning, I would let them repair it, figure out what they'd done, and then buy another guitar and work on that, a similar guitar, right? That's how I learned. I read books, because back then I didn't have the media that we have now on the internet. The internet's great for information like that. Whatever you do, though, don't start on a really good guitar unless you're extremely mechanically inclined and you have a lot of patience. If it's your only guitar, don't, because you're going to be too impatient to wait. Some guitar projects I've had have taken me a couple years, even longer, you know. But I'm not in a rush, because I've already got like 20 guitars that are playable. So I just take my time and, you know, and go through them and enjoy the whole process. And that way, if I'm missing a certain part and looking for something, or I got a tricky repair to do, I can take my time at it and do it when I'm in the mood. So this guitar I really like. It's got a lot of pluses to it. Like I said, it's got this nice black graphite nut, the string nut here that I was talking about earlier. Graphite is a natural lubricating material, so that when you tune your strings with your tuning pegs or your machine heads, that's what I like to call them, the strings, as they're being tightened, the wrap of the string is dragged across the nut, and that can bind on some materials, but I don't find that this material binds at all. It's pretty smooth, you know. And this guitar has a really good, it has a really good sound. I mean, I'm real happy with the guitar. You can get these in other colors. There's sunbursts. There's some that are a little more deluxe with gold hardware. They cost a little more. I just happened to pick this guitar up and really liked it and decided, you know what? This is a great guitar. I'll take it. And there's about, like a good setup on a guitar. If you get a technician, a guitar technician that really knows his stuff, and he's real good and he's got a good rep, you know, like ask somebody to, if you're at a reputable music store and you make friends with somebody at the counter, ask them who they use for their guitar work. they'll more than likely have somebody either in-house or know of somebody. They'll give you a number to call or recommend somebody. Like I said, you can, if you know musicians or friends or that are musicians, or maybe a friend of or something, you can always sit down and talk with them and ask them who they use for their guitar repairs. Because most good musicians, if they don't do their own repairs, have somebody that they can trust with their prized possessions. Because even if my guitar was $15, I still wouldn't want a hack mechanic working on it, because I want the guitar playing as good as it can. A guitar that doesn't play very good can be very discouraging to a beginner. It might not stay in tune properly. It might be hard to press down the frets. You may think that playing an F chord or a bar chord is impossible, or getting a chord that's in tune. Like some of the chords that sound the most out of tune on a guitar that's not set up properly are like a D chord or a C chord or a high bar chord, you know, like a barred F that's moved up to 10th fret. If you tune your guitar open and then you play it up at the 10th fret and it's not in tune, it's either really bad strings, and they could be dead, they could be old, or it's intonation adjustment, or could be, more than likely that's what it is. Adjustments, you know, mechanical adjustments, which a good guitar technician can take care of for you. So I think I've covered this guitar really well. I love this guitar. It's a beauty. It's a hollow body. I'll go to a couple of other hollow bodies, but I kind of want to cover something on tremolo bars. I don't think it's a good idea for a beginner student to go to a tremolo bar guitar, but I'm going to mention it anyways. So I'm going to unplug this sucker and go over, and I'm going to switch. I'm going to switch to my Kramer here and tell you a little story about this. Guitars don't have to be expensive to be good, or new to be good. This is an old one. I wouldn't say it's super old, but it's an old one. It's from the 80s, the metal. What I like about this guitar is it's got separate switches for each pickup, and it's only got a volume, no tone. I really like this guitar. I didn't pay very much for it. I paid $200 for it. I was driving through a small town locally, close by, and I was in a traffic rush hour, and I looked in the window of this pawn shop, and here this thing was sitting there, and it was 5 minutes to 5 minutes before the pawn shop closed. And I ran in there. I got out of the traffic line and ran in there and said, "Hey man, is that an American Kramer in the window?" And the guy that owned the pawn shop was a real cranky old fart. And he said, "That's what it says on the guitar." And I said, "Well, can I look at it?" He goes, "You got 5 minutes before I close." So I had a look at it. It was pretty beat up. I didn't think I was going to be able to save it. It was pretty rough. But I liked the neck and the hardware. And I thought, you know what, if I get this guitar cheap enough, the original Floyd Rose, the pickups and the machine heads could be worth to scrap the guitar and just take the parts out and find another body and neck, right? If the body and neck on this guitar can't be saved. In the end, I got the guitar for $200, and it had the bar missing on it too. This is a Floyd Rose. It's a floating bridge. What I mean by that is, you can see here when I push down on the bar that the whole back end of the bar moves. What it does is it loosens the tension of the string. Now on this guitar, on this type of bridge, you can go a long ways with it. You can do all the Eddie Van Halen bomb drops. This was invented by Eddie Van Halen and Floyd Rose. They asked Eddie, I remember the interview very clearly, how come he never took credit for the invention of the Floyd Rose? And he said, Floyd was my next door neighbor. He was the machinist that did all the metal work for the prototypes. And he needed the money, and I just wanted a good bar. So Eddie was pretty gracious that way. But he's a brilliant, Eddie Van Halen is a brilliant electric guitar player, one of the best. And he was a brilliant inventor. He's invented a few things, and the Floyd Rose is one of them. It's, out of all the bar systems, I prefer the Floyd Rose the best. There are some downfalls to it. See, up here is the locking nut. What that does is cancel out the machine heads, the tuning pegs here. Why you'd want to do that is that on a guitar, when it's tuned to concert pitch with a set of nine gauge strings, that's from the first string, the thinnest, 9, 11, 16, 24, 32, 42, and that's in thousandths of an inch. That's the gauge. That's what I call a light gauge string, a 9. The tension on the string is over 110 pounds, which would be like about 55 or 60 kilograms if you're in kilograms. That's a heck of a lot of string pressure on this little thin piece of wood here, right? And when you drop the tension of the string, like I can bring this bar right down, you can see my strings are absolutely out of tune now. There's nothing there, right? And it'll go right back up to in tune. Wow, that's a lot of pressure change. So there's a problem. When you want to do that kind of pressure change, what'll happen is the wrap on your tuning peg posts or your machine head posts where your string wraps around will unravel because, of course, you're releasing the tension on the string, right? And just going to adjust my mic a little. And that's an issue because when you're going from this 110 pounds to 0 to nothing and then back, what's the chance of the springs, because this is spring loaded in the back, you'll see the spring cavity in the back here, and it's accessible by taking the cap off and adjusting with a screwdriver. The reason why you'd want to do that is to level out the bar. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's the adjustment for it. So the locking nuts there, once you get it strung up, because this type of bar doesn't use a ball end. If you take a look at a raw string out of the package, a brand new one, it's got a little brass ball end on it, right? Well, you don't need to use that on here. On this bar, one end of the string is clamped into the bar by a Allen key adjustment back here. It's pinched, called a pinch block. It pinches the end of the string in place, and it sits in there. And the other end is wrapped around the tuning machine, and when it's tuned up to pitch, it's clamped here. So now you've got nothing, no issues with unraveling the strings, the ball end coming unhooked or anything, or even the ball end unraveling with that kind of a pressure change. And you can go from 0 right back up. Now, what's the use of a tremolo bar? Well, I'll talk about that in a second, give you an idea of what I use it for. Eddie Van Halen uses it a lot if you're familiar with them. Like I said, this guitar is a really good finger tapping guitar because it's flat, nice and narrow, you know. It's really responsive to that kind of playing. Now, the floating bridge thing, what happens is it has to be adjusted, and the tension of the spring has to equal the tension of the strings, whatever that is. Thicker strings, tension goes up. Different tuning, tension's changed again. So the downfall of this guitar is it's really a one tuning type of guitar. Most guitars are. That's one of the reasons why I have all these friends here, is they're not all tuned to the same thing. For example, this guitar is tuned to standard E. This is my Floyd Rose for standard E. The Steve Vai Gem flower pattern is my Floyd Rose tuned to E flat standard, or D sharp if you want to call it that, a half step lower. So that guitar stays in E flat. This one stays in E. The reason for it is that every time you change a string, if you don't change with the exact gauge that your Floyd Rose is set up for, it throws the tension adjustment out and the bar doesn't sit right. This bar back here will sit back or forward depending on whether you put a thicker string on or thinner. And it'll throw the whole adjustment of the guitar and the playability of the guitar. So if you have a professional set up your Floyd, make sure you change the string with the exact same gauge and the same brand, because different brands are wrapped differently and they change tension a little bit. The tension on them is different. So if the guitar is adjusted for a certain type of tension, certain type of string on a Floyd Rose, that's what you have to keep it to. The downfall of a Floyd Rose is that if you break a string, it goes totally out of tune. So if you're doing a gig or a show, you've got to have a spare, because you're not going to sit there, because it's a little more of a mechanical endeavor. It takes you more time to change a string on a Floyd, because you got to go through the mechanical procedure of changing it, than it is on a stop tailpiece or even the trapezoid like on my Hagstrom. That's an easier guitar to change a string on than this one for sure. Plus it goes out of tune so badly. See, on a trapezoid style or like my SG, what they call a stop tailpiece, the strings, if you break one string, it doesn't go out of tune very much. A little bit, but not like a Floyd Rose where it totally goes out of tune and you couldn't even finish the song with it. You just have to put it down. So that's the downfall to it. It's a downfall if you're a beginner because they're temperamental to tune. You have to understand the mechanics of it. I would not recommend it for a beginner, but if you've already got one, then I'm hoping that this helps you understand the guitar a little more. As I mentioned before, this is a humbucker here, and these two are the single coils. That's just a different combination of sounds. As I was saying earlier about this guitar, I liked it because I've got an individual switch for each one of my pickups. Down is on, up is off. Right now I'm running all three pickups. This guitar sounds incredibly good, raunched out. You hear that bomb drop I did at the end, right? That's what I use this for, you know. Stays in tune, right? Get lots of different sounds out of the guitar. So that's the reason for having the bars, getting these different sounds. And there's lots of bar technique things. I can't cover it all in this lesson, but I'm wanting to help you out. This guitar is a bolt-on neck. You see back here 4 bolts. You know what? Some people will argue with you and say, oh, you know, it's better to have a pin neck or a neck through body. I disagree. The bolt-on neck can be just as good as a neck through or a pin neck like my Hagstrom. It just depends on the manufacturer and how good quality it was. So obviously this guitar survived, and I ended up saving it because I loved it so much because the neck was beautiful. I redid the frets. I had to, and I went around to the different cosmetic shops and found, because I wanted to keep it original, found some pink nail polish that matched fairly closely and started working on touching up the guitar, because originally this was a flip-flop paint job, and when you play under the lights, it looks great because there's tinges of purple, silver, and pink in it, and it changes color under the colored lights on stage, and that was part of the thing. Hey man, if you play good and you look good and your guitar looks good, then you got something to offer. You know, you're an entertainer. You may as well look good too, right? But I love the guitar neck. It's great. It's got a Seymour Duncan humbucker in the back. That's the Seymour Duncan makes some good pickups. This is the Jeff Beck model. It was stock original in it. How much would it have cost you to get this done by a guitar technician? Well, I paid $220 with tax for the guitar. Paid another $15 for the missing tremolo bar, and put about $250 to $300. Let's say $300 max. So the guitar cost $7 by the time it was all done if I had to pay for my labor. But wait a minute. How much would a good guitar like this cost? Well, first of all, you can't even buy an American-built guitar for under $1,500 anymore that's any good. And this was a top-of-the-line Kramer at the time. back in the 80s, this guitar was almost $2,000. So to put in that time into a guitar like this was definitely worth it. And it would be for you too if it's a guitar you like. There's a beautiful neck on this guitar. A Strat style body. This is, designed from a Strat, like my G&L over here, the green one with the white pickguard. It's a double cutaway. On my hollow body there, it's a double cutaway. As a matter of fact, I only brought, there's only 2 guitars here that have single cutaways. The Danelectro, you'll see it has a single cutaway there, and I'll get to that in a minute. And my cheap Chinese hollow body back here, the Sunburst hollow body, it's got a single cutaway. The rest of them have 2 cutaways. A cutaway is so that you can get up into the higher fret region easier. Some guitars are easier to get up into that higher fret region. When you're purchasing a guitar, an electric guitar, you'll want to check things like that out. If you don't play very well, like I said before, bring a friend that you know that plays a little bit. Bring somebody that knows how to play really well. Or if you can't do either, then go to a music store that wants to serve you and help you and tell them the truth. Tell them, listen, I don't play yet. I'm wanting to buy a guitar. I've read a book or I've done some research on buying a guitar and I need your help. Would you mind demonstrating a few guitars for me? My budget is, tell them your budget and whether you're looking for a solid body or a hollow body. Ask them what they like. Ask them to play some chords on it. Ask them to play a song or two, some riffs, ask them to play something on the guitar for you so they can demonstrate it. Then you sit down with the guitar and ask yourself, how does this feel? Does it feel good? Like when I sit with it, is it comfortable? When I wrap my hand around the neck, if you're a smaller bodied person, you're short, you don't want a big fat body like my Hagstrom because it's a big body and your arms got to wrap around it more. You'll want to find something that has a smaller body to it. My hands are fairly big, but if you got small hands, you might want to find a smaller neck that feels more comfortable. So you have to picture your hand on the neck of the guitar and say to yourself, would I be happy? Does this feel good? Would I be happy playing this for hours a day for the next few years? Would I be satisfied with this, right? You've got to ask yourself that question. And if you know a few chords, by all means, play the chords. How does it feel? How does it sound, How does the guitar sound? See, I like this guitar because not only does it sound amazing when it's distorted, but it sounds really good clean. Great guitar, and well worth the money that I put into it. I don't think I put in $700. I'd say it was more like maybe $400, but because I did the work over a long period of time and it was a hobby. Some people collect butterflies, some people collect bugs, some people collect stamps. I collect guitars. Sorry, man, that's my hobby. It's hard to separate my hobby from my work because it just seems to be one continuous thing, but I do enjoy saving old guitars like this because it was pretty wrecked when I got it, but it's a gorgeous guitar. No, it's not for sale. Buzz off. Get your own. Yeah. So there's my story on this guitar. I think I've covered quite a bit for you on the tremolo bar. How do you tune this thing? When the locking nut is in place, there's fine tuners at the back right here. And they can be readjusted or re-equalized by unlocking the nut here and tuning here, tuning back up, and then locking back down and using the fine tuners. Sometimes you have to realign the fine tuners because you've run out of adjustment. Then you have to unlock it and use the big machine heads here to tune the guitar. That's the downfall, is the mechanical thing. There is another option. I'm going to go to that right now. I think I'm going to go to my G&L Strat. That'll be next. Now, this has got a story to it too. This guitar fell out of a truck at about 40 miles an hour. It was at the back of the tailgate. somebody was doing a gig. It wasn't very old when it fell out of the truck. And new, these are mid-2000s, 2500, 2600. It's a really expensive guitar. I got it for 800 with the hard shell case, not the original hard shell case that it fell out of the truck with. Now, I didn't know at the time the whole history to the guitar. I looked at it and played it and thought, this is a good deal for a guitar that's so expensive. Why is it a good deal? And I started to look at it, and I could tell by the way it was, it played horrible. It just didn't play good at all. And I discovered the reason why it didn't play very well was because of the shock and the way it was dropped out of the truck. And I had to experiment with this guitar for a while, but at an $800 price tag for a $2,500 guitar, I would say that that was motivation enough. And I figured I could fix it. And I did, and it's one of my favorite Strats. Strat is this style of shape. It was originally Leo Fender invented the Stratocaster. And G&L stands for George Fullerton and Leo Fender, because when Leo sold out Fender Musical Instruments in 1965, he sold it to CBS, the CBS Corporation. He wasn't allowed to build guitars for a while. He signed a promise that he'd stay out of the building industry for a while, but eventually he got bored and went back to building. And when he did go back to building, he went back with his old building buddy, George, and that's what the G&L stand for, George and Leo. Now Leo's passed away, and his family is still building really nice guitars. These are high quality guitars. They need very little setup on them when you buy this particular type of guitar, if you buy it new, but they still need a little setup. This guitar has a floating bridge on it, but it's not a locking bridge. It doesn't have the fine tuners at the back. But it's got a fulcrum. It's got 2 pins like the Floyd Rose. It's a blade, and there's a pin, right? And the blade from the pressure of the string, and it's also got the spring adjustment in the back. You can see it right there. The blade of this metal bar, the plate, sits on an adjustable screw, so you can lower or raise the plate. And that blade is pushed up against the screw, and it rocks back and forth. And that's what's called a fulcrum, right? The old traditional, I don't have a traditional, no, not today. I don't have a traditional Strat bar today. But usually the traditional Strat bar, the old ones, had just 6 screws that were screwed into the wood. They're not as good as a fulcrum, in my opinion. The newer Strats with the fulcrums on them are pretty good. This one's got locking machine heads instead of a locking nut. This is another alternative. It's still a downfall because it's still a floating bridge. And the interesting thing is these are Leo Fender designed. These are single coils, but they're staggered. Too many coils, too many single coils staggered side by side. They still have the single coil sound, but as you remember me telling you before, when they designed the humbucker, the reason why they called it a humbucker is because it stopped the hum. It was bucking the hum, meaning, getting rid of it. Humbucking, getting rid of the hum. Because the 2 coils together created a different field, magnetic field, which dropped the noise level, the microphonic noise level. So this one kind of does the same thing, but still gives me the single coil sound. Another great Leo Fender. Notice I haven't changed the volume on my amp or anything since I've been plugging these guitars in. You can hear quite a difference in some of the volumes of the guitars depending on the pickups. So yeah, depending on where it's made and how it's made and how the pickups are wound can be a big difference in the sound of the guitar. This is a lovely guitar, and I did finally get it working properly. Took me a long time. I would say it was about $300 worth of labor, maybe $400, but it's still a really good deal because if you add that up it's still way underpriced for a beauty like this. And there was a few marks in it, but I managed to take the marks out so it looks new. It's not. I've really played it a lot, and it wasn't brand new when I bought it, although it was fairly new. I think it was a couple months old when they dropped it out of the back of the truck. The owner wasn't smart enough. This is where you have to be smart. The owner wasn't smart enough to spend the money and take it to a good technician, because it would have saved him buying another guitar. He just wasn't happy with the guitar after it was dropped. It never played the same. I can see why now, because it took a little work to figure it out. But once I got it figured out, it's been really good. And you'd never know it was dropped out of a truck or damaged that bad. You can't tell anymore because I've done the work. As I mentioned before, the alternative to a locking nut is the locking machine heads. You don't have to have a fine tuner with locking machine heads, because the locking machine head not only locks the string in place, so you don't have to wrap. Notice if you look at my posts, my string posts here on the machine heads, none of them are, the strings aren't wrapped. Well, how the heck do those strings hold in there if they're not wrapped around the posts? Well, they have an adjustment at the back here on the headstock. This is a tightening device, right? And what it does is there's a pinch block, there's a hollow shaft, and when you run your string through the hole, you can use this pinch block by tightening it back down. And it, just like a little vise, pinches the string into place so it doesn't move. So you don't have to wrap the string around the string post. That way, when you release the tension of the string and bring it back up, the tuning issue is pretty much over with, because you don't have the string unraveling with the tension and then trying to ravel itself back up. Because obviously, when you use the floating bridge and all that tension's on the string, and then you release the tension by dropping the bar and lowering the tension, the string starts to unravel. And then when the bar pulls back, it doesn't pull the string back. The string will never ravel itself back up where it was before. So what's the chance of it ever going back in tune? Well, very little, right? But with the locking machine head on there and a graphite nut, you'll notice there's a graphite nut so that the strings don't bind when the pressure is changed, because the string moves back and forth, right? This way through the string nut as the tension is released and brought back. You know, so this is a great guitar. I like this guitar a lot. It's a good one. So you don't have to pay a lot for a guitar to get a good one, but you have to know what you're doing with them. And if you don't know what you're doing, then take it to somebody that does know what they're doing and get some recommendations. Every good guitar technician will have recommendations. They'll have references or other people that recommend them, because you're taking your baby in, you know, I mean, my guitars are really personal. If I'm going to take it to somebody to repair it, it better be somebody that really cares about what they're doing. Because I'm not going to take it to just whoever. And even if it's a $300 guitar, I'm not going to do that. So, do some research. Find somebody in your area that has a really good rep. It's not unusual to wait a week for a guitar if you leave a guitar for a week. I'd say 2 weeks max if the guy's really busy. Get somebody that really knows what they're doing. Dan Erlewine from Stu McDonald is a very good engineer technician. Amazing. I've learned a lot from that guy on repairing guitars just on the internet and just by going through their magazine of parts and tools. There's always something to learn, boys and girls, always something to learn. And I love to work on guitars I've never worked on, because you discover things, quirks about certain guitars, and you learn their character and their personality. I love stuff like that. But get a good guitar technician. It's worth it. If you find a guitar that would normally be priced at $1,000 and you buy it because it's damaged or it's in rough shape, and you put a lot of elbow grease into it and you clean it up real good, and then you bring it to a guitar technician, you can save yourself some money that way. by, cleaning the instrument up. Don't use water. Use a dry, soft cloth. You can even spit on it, a little bit of spit, because a lot of times if it was owned by somebody that played or jammed or did some singing, the saliva from their mouth as they're singing gets sprayed onto the instrument. It just does. And you can take a soft cotton cloth and spit on the cloth, and your spit will take the other spit off. And it's a thing called spit polish. You can actually do that. There's other cleaners out there, but I mean, I've taken really old guitars that were really rough that way because they've been, the person owning it had been singing off it for a long time, and they spit all over it from their singing, from the saliva from the mouth. And I just literally spit polished the guitar, and man, it looked really good after I cleaned it up. So you can do things like that for yourself by not doing anything dumb and just cleaning up the instrument real nice. So it's not filthy dirty when you take it into the mechanic. They'll appreciate that. Or if you don't know what you're doing, you tell the mechanic, you pay them extra. Can you please bring my guitar back up as good as you can, clean it back up for me, and pay them for it. They won't mind if they're going to get paid for it. It's just when you bring a filthy guitar in and you're tight on your money and you don't want to pay, well, nobody wants to work on your guitar. Don't do that. Like, respect the mechanic. If he's got a good reputation, be professional about the way you deal with it, even if you don't know a lot about what you're doing. Ask questions politely. They don't mind answering some of the questions. But don't expect to learn it all in one step. And like I said, the floating bridge is not what I really recommend for a beginner, because you have to learn some mechanical. You have to deal with the mechanical end of the guitar. It takes a little more skill. So this is my G&L. Lovely guitar, love it. Now I'm going to go to something that's really inexpensive. One of my cheaper guitars, brand new. I bought this. Oh, it's about 15 years old now. I know it doesn't look that way because I baby my guitars. This is the Danelectro. This is the Korean model. You can get them pretty cheap online. They weren't very expensive to begin with. Very nice shaped neck on this one. Machine heads aren't super expensive, but they're pretty decent. They're not as nice as the ones on my Hagstrom or my Kramer, but they've served their purpose really well. They're kind of a middle of the road machine head, but they are retro looking and they look good. They suit the instrument. The original Danelectros were made out of recycled parts. This has single coil pickups in it, and they're lipstick coil pickups. Originally, these pickups used back in the 50s. Ladies' lipstick came in metal lipstick containers, and they were round like this, and millions of them were thrown out. And the guy that invented the Danelectro guitar took these lipstick cases and made magnetic coils and fit them into the lipstick cases. And that's why they call them a lipstick coil pickup. They don't use old lipstick coils. They don't use the old lipstick tubes anymore because they don't make lipstick tubes out of metal anymore like they did back then. But they copied them and they make the same pickup. And this is a very good reissue copy. The Korean ones are some of my favorite Danelectro reissues. I got two. I got a 6-string bass and this one. I bought a bunch of them when they first came out because it used to be that you could only find the American ones. And Jimmy Page is one of the guys that made the Danelectro really popular. He played slide on his Danelectro, and lots of other people used them too. Stevie Ray Vaughan used the Danelectro on his Family Style album. So did Jimmy Vaughan. I think most good guitar players have a lipstick coil pickup guitar in their collection because the lipstick single coils have a unique sound to them. They don't sound quite the same as the humbuckers. The humbuckers have more bass in them and more power to them. They're usually a little louder. The single coils are usually a little thinner sounding and a little higher endy. The lipstick coils aren't very strong sounding, but they have a lovely chime sound to it. You can hear it in the guitar. This is a very good guitar. I've used it for studio sessions, for playing out, like gigging, for recording sessions, for teaching. I'm using it right now, teach you. And I've used it on my videos when the mood is right. This has definitely got a different sound to it. This guitar new was around the $300 mark. I think they're a little more now. They're made in China. I've actually got a Chinese Danelectro now. I call it the Jimmy Page Danelectro because it's a copy of what Jimmy Page used in the early days which was the black double cutaway Danelectro with the 2 single coils in it, and it's a black matte finish with a white pickguard on it. You'll see it if you look at some pictures of Jimmy Page in the early days when he was first becoming famous. And that's made in China. You know what? That's a good guitar too. It's really good. Both these guitars needed around $75 worth of a setup on it. But once they were set up, they're really good. They got bolt-on necks. This one's got 5 bolts in it. It's actually a very nice guitar to play. It's light. It sounds good. Has a little more tendency to feedback because of the type of pickups in it. I don't think I can get it to feedback here because I'm not at a volume where it'll feed back. But no, I'd have to be at a higher volume to get it to feed back, like the volume to get over a drummer. But anyways, this guitar was around the 300 mark, and then you spent another 75 on it, and you're up around the 400 mark. By the way, when you buy a guitar, make sure you buy a case for it. If you buy a guitar used somewhere and it has no case, get a case for it. Go somewhere and get a case, at least a gig bag. Because if you go through all this work for your poor guitar and then you carry it around without a case, it's really hard on the guitar. I just want to kill people that come in and I've just spent hours tweaking their guitar and making it real nice. And I go, where's your case? And they go, oh, I don't have a case for it. And if it's my student, I tell them, you know what? I'm not giving you this guitar until you get a case. You can forget it. Because after I put all that love and that work into the guitar, and you're just going to walk out the door into the cold air or into the heat or into the rain or whatever with this guitar exposed? No, you're not going to do that, right? Get a case. Even if it's a gig bag for $30, it's better than none. I'd suggest a hard shell case if you're going to move it around a lot because it protects the guitar. So this is a great guitar, the Danelectro reissues. They're really good and they're reasonably priced, you know, in between the $300 to $500 range, depending on what model. They got quite a few different models out. They do need setups, though, because they won't stay in tune right off the rack, most of them. If you find one that does, then you lucked out. But most of them do settle because they're made offshore and, you know, they need some room to settle. But great guitar, you know, once they're set up. Simple. This one's got the TV knobs on it. So the brown knob here is for the tone, and the white knob is for the volume, and you have one for each pickup, one for the front, one for the back. That's your selector switch. You know, in the middle is both pickups. Great guitar for the price. Really happy with this guitar. And the other Chinese Danelectro. When they were first making the Danelectros in China, I didn't like them, but the quality now is really good that I actually own a couple of them now, and I like them both, and they both sound really good. Very good guitar for a beginner if you're on a budget and you don't want to buy used because you don't know what you're doing, and you want to get a decent guitar. You'll always use it even when you become a better player. It's a handy thing to have in your arsenal of tools, sound tools. I've got one more guitar to show you just to end this, just for fun, and it's the fact that if you know a little bit about the guitar, and this is the one sitting up on my amplifier, right here. This poor thing. This was $15 at a pawn shop. It had no strings on it. It was pretty rough, but it was $15. It's a late 60s, early 70s Japanese model guitar. It's a hollow body, and it's a true hollow body. And it's kind of in between hollow body. I'm obviously not going to get to my other guitar today because I spent some time with these. Doesn't matter. The point is, to give you a good idea of what to do when you're buying a guitar. And it's not for me to show off all my guitars. I wouldn't have time to do it all. But just as an example, this wasn't a very expensive guitar. It was 15 bucks. But I liked the neck. Now, this guitar with distortion in a band volume isn't super great because it's a full hollow body and it tends to want to feed back. But you know what? It sounds pretty good. And same kind of setup here with the selector switch. It's in a different spot. And the Hagstrom, it's up here. On this one, it's down here. You know, you have a separate volume and tone. There's a bunch of things missing on it, but for 15 bucks, the whammy arm was missing, and I found one of my collection of parts because I collect things. I go into pawn shops, go into music stores. If I see something I might be able to use, I buy it because I might be able to use it later. There was a volume knob missing. These three are original. This one isn't. But I kind of found one that kind of matches it enough for it to work. The setup work on this was $150. But you know what? It's a cool guitar for $150 setup and $15. So less than 200 bucks for this guitar. I use it, not as much as my other guitars. It's just a cool guitar, but it'd be pretty good for somebody that was just beginning out on a limited budget because it plays good and it's intonated and stays in tune. And it's even got a tremolo bar on it. And when I say tremolo bar, I mean this is a type of bar that it's a copy of a Bigsby. This is a type of bar that you only want to shake the string. That's what a tremolo is, a vibrato, right? Because if you use it like Eddie Van Halen did with the big bomb drop, like I was showing you earlier on Pinky, it'll go out of tune. It definitely will go out of tune. So, there you go, $15 guitar, and I put $150 into it. You have to be prepared to put a few bucks into it, but if, like I said, if you get a good technician, it's well worth it. If you find a guitar, I really like the neck on this guitar. It's very similar to, what guitar is it similar to? Very similar to the Kramer neck. It's got a feel like that. So for a cheap guitar, it's actually pretty cool. This is a bolt-on neck. This one has the bolts kind of recessed. There was a cap over this before, but I never did get around to finding another cap. But it doesn't matter. You know, there's a few nicks and marks in it, but it's in good shape. It's like it's 40 years old now. And although these pickups look like they're humbuckers, they're not. They're just a big fat single coil. I know because I've taken them apart. Sometimes the old Japanese guitars, they'll fool you. It'll look like a humbucker, but it's not. But it's still a good, still a good sounding pickup. I love the front pickup. It sounds really good. And as you can hear, it reacted fairly nicely to the distortion. Pretty cool little piece in the collection, a specialty instrument that I'd use for certain sounds, but it's a lot of fun, and it was a project. I did the work myself, and it was just something I did over a period of time, but I like the guitar. No, it's not for sale. And anyways, so I'm hoping that this has really opened your mind to what kind of a guitar you need, and that way when you go to buy one, you have an idea of what you're doing. And I wish you all the luck with that, too. If you check out my acoustic lesson, my acoustic video on buying an acoustic guitar, you'll also pick up some other tips from that. If you combine them with this, you'd be pretty knowledgeable to go out and be ready to buy a guitar for yourself. There's other things that I didn't talk about, like amplifiers, because when you buying an electric guitar, you have to have an amplifier. I just don't have the time to get into that. Maybe I'll do another video at one point on buying amplifiers. But for now, it's about the guitar. But an amplifier is just as important to your sound as your guitar. Once you get your guitar all tweaked and working, you need a decent amplifier. It doesn't have to be big, but it should be a good quality. I like tube amps, but that would be another discussion. So if you like my style of teaching, and once you find yourself a guitar, maybe you'll be searching for a good teacher. I'm going to invite you to come on down and check out the Riff Ninja Academy, and I'm offering a 3-day free trial. You could come in and check out if you like the way I teach and talk about the guitars here. I'm sure you'll like what I have on my Riff Ninja Academy. We've got some great lessons, and you could learn how to play. Either way, though, I wish you all the best and all the luck, and may you find the guitar that you connect with that's your best buddy. All right, take care, over and out.